want to welcome everybody to our August PAPREN Parks and Green Space meeting. I'm going to apologize quickly for my Wi-Fi, so if we do miss anything, feel free to let me know. Shoot me a message on chat, and then we can always hand it off. But we're going to do our best to get through what we need to here. We've already tried Terry's presentation; that works just fine. So, but if you don't hear something from me, just let me know.
Oh, you're sounding fine. Yeah, I can help out if you need it, but
perfect.
You sound fine. So
okay, perfect. Well, again, hi everybody. We're starting our presentation here. We've already put in our name and affiliation and special interest in the chat. So if you haven't done that already, please go ahead and do so now. Just want to take a quick moment to introduce our co-chairs here, starting with Dr. Rich Christiana. I thought that he was here. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Rich Christiana, Appalachian State University.
And then we have Dr. Jeanette Gaston.
hi, everybody. I'm at Tulane University School of Public Health and Tropical Medicine in New Orleans.
And then I didn't see Sandy join, but Sandy Slater is our third co-chair here, and she's at Concordia University, Wisconsin. Meeting agenda today, we're going to have a presentation from one of our own members, Terry Horton. Follow that up with a Q&A, and then kind of talk about project updates / new project proposals as we go into the new year here. We'll have an open mic quick, and then we'll talk about next meetings and upcoming presentations as well from PAPREN. So our presentation this week is this month is from Terry. Dr. Terry Horton is a human biologist in the Evolutionary and Ecological Approaches to Health and Development program in the Department of Anthropology at Northwestern University. As an associate professor of research, she leads projects that investigate the psychological and physiological mechanisms which engage with nature influences mental and physical health. Dr. Horton received her Bachelor's of Science in Zoology from the University of Washington and her PhD in Biology from the University of Utah. She is the founder of the Nature, Culture, and Human Health Network, which builds relationships among people with interests in investigating and applying knowledge about the health benefits of nature to improve the health and well-being of the Chicago region communities. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing and let Terry take on over here.
Thank you. And let me see if all of our practice on sharing the slideshow is going to pay off. Okay, can everybody see my actual presentation? Okay, Andy?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep, we're good.
We're good. Yay! Practice does make perfect. I want to welcome you and thank you all for being here today and introducing one of many projects that people produced during the COVID pandemic and how it impacted people's time outside. I want to talk about the design of the study and who was involved in it. I'm not going to dig deep into data because you'll see that there are a lot of ways that we can parse the data on this presentation or on this survey. So we can talk about the different ways that we could do that. But first I want to introduce the team because, okay, let's see, there we go. Okay. I really do view the team that put this together as being a transdisciplinary team, and there are many people who are on this call who are involved in helping us develop the study or the survey in the very early stages. Some of these people you will know, others will be new to you. We have Gina Basseni from Kansas State University representing physical activity. Jason Vaccaro, I saw Jason join us a little bit ago. Catherine Game, who is the CEO of a conservation and arts organization here in the Chicago area. Myself, Melissa Manis, who was a graduate student in our department at the time we started this and has just finished a postdoc at the University of Manitoba. And I'm going to forget where she now has a faculty position as an assistant professor. Dr. William Miller, who just joined us also, is one of my colleagues at Northwestern. He is from our school of the McCormick School of Engineering and Applied Sciences, and he has a background in chemical and biological engineering, but has taken on in his retirement a whole new view of getting involved in conservation and green infrastructure, and is chair of the Illinois He's chair of the board of trustees for the Illinois chapter of the Nature Conservancy, and also chairs the Science Advisory Committee. Dr. Amber Pearson from Michigan State University, who's a health geographer, and she is in the Department of Public Health there. Dr. Beth Redbird, who's also at Northwestern University. She is in the Department of Sociology, and her specialty is survey methodology. And Dr. Courtney Schultz, who I think also many of you know, who studies health, or does health behavior research and examines park recreation and tourism management, and also does a lot of survey development and work. So we had a very diverse team, which I think was really important for the production of this survey. So I want to go through these things today: why we developed the Coping in Nature survey during COVID-19, what our theoretical framework was, how we went about building the survey, how the survey was distributed, which is important because we linked it with a survey called the Corona Data US survey that was implemented by Dr. Beth Redbird, and I'll go into more detail about that later. A little bit about what's in the survey. I'm not doing a really deep dive in the formal part of the presentation, but I have slides at the end that we can pull up if we want to have a further discussion about what the questions actually look like and what's there, and then just a little bit about some of the data that we found, or some of the surprises we found in the data so far. So the impetus for creating CANS is many of us, because I think there are several other people on this call who have done some kind of survey during the COVID pandemic about looking at the impact of COVID and park closures and lockdowns on people's time outside and time in nature. So my direct nudges for doing something first came from Catherine Game, and I'm getting to the point where I love Catherine, but I'm going to stop answering her phone calls because every time she calls, she's got a new project for me. But I say that with a smile. Catherine is the CEO of the Brushwood Center at Ryerson Woods, which is a really fabulous conservation and nature engagement organization that engages people in nature and the arts. Catherine has a background in environmental sciences, but while she works in this very rural and lush conservation area up in the county north of Cook County, which is Cook is where Chicago is located, Catherine lives in one of the northernmost parts of Chicago, which is a very dense urban neighborhood. And early in the pandemic, Chicago, like many cities, shut down everything. Chicago was on the shores of Lake Michigan. The beaches to the lake were shut. The parks were shut. So people in all neighborhoods, whether they were historically disinvested neighborhoods or even the well-to-do, wealthier neighborhoods, couldn't go to parks. And Catherine saw this as an in contrast and a way to look at history of redlining and inequality. And then the other thing she saw is going up into Lake County when she would go to work is the forest preserves had kept their trails open and people were flooding into the trails. So it was this contrast between what was going on in rural, which is also primarily more heavily white and wealthier county than in Chicago, that there was again an opportunity to look at inequity in access. Beth Redbird also provided some impetus because Beth is a sociologist. She saw that the pandemic was a big social event, and being interested in the political and sociological components of what was happening, she started a survey very early. She must have been one of the first to get something out there that is on the web, known as Corona Data US. Eventually got funding for it and has surveyed people repeatedly since April 2020 in a longitudinal study. And I'll explain how she was able to do that in a little bit more. But what has now happened is we built the CANS project, the Coping in Nature during COVID, to take advantage of the early data that Beth had collected in the Corona data. So we can use the Corona data file as a source of people's really early opinions about COVID, various political attitudes, changes in employment and income since April 2020. And they did their final survey in the field, I believe, in May of 2022, or I think, or maybe they've done one more. However, there's a lot of data in there and a lot of things that we can mine. So going back to the issue of parks and closures, I've mentioned this, is that, in many areas, park closures, and there was lower access to green space in urban areas, and particularly in low income areas that already, even before the pandemic, had limited access to green space. And there was higher access to green space and still open trails in more suburban and higher income areas. So this was an opportunity to look at the disparities in access. However, as we started talking about this among the team, and again, this is not new, most people have discussed it, is that access is not just about proximity to space. And the COVID pandemic really highlighted this, because with the parks being shut down, you could have a park right across the street, but you can go into it. So you were close to it, but you didn't have access because the government had closed it. And this means you didn't have permission or the ability to enter or use a space. And this is something that for many minoritized people, whatever the cause, even before the pandemic, didn't feel that they had access to space. And so when we need to think about access, it's not just proximity, it's do people welcome and do they feel safe going into a space? Do they feel they know how to use the space? Do they feel it's appropriate? So there are lots of questions. And it's around these wider questions of access that we decided to build the CANS survey. And again, some of the background we took into the designing the study was to really dive deep into this concept of intersectionality and the additive effects of multiple demographic characteristics. So race and ethnicity, gender, socioeconomic status, place of residence, education level, and age, and also, a history of chronic health diseases, health conditions. So we tried to build this, and we kept kind of juggling of, how do we put all of these pieces together? The typical herding cats issues. We finally settled on a blend of two theoretical or conceptual frameworks that involve the health belief model from public health and the constraints negotiation theory from leisure sciences. And what we came up with was our own conceptual model where we queried the issues of time, how much time were people spending engaging with nature, and how was that impacted by factors related to their history, whether it's their identity, where they live, their past lifestyle behaviors. Did they consider themselves an outdoor person? Would they rather go to the movies than go outdoors? And their historical, health conditions. Then there were the more overt barriers and constraints to getting outside. And again, we considered structural barriers, interpersonal and intrapersonal barriers. We looked at factors that allowed them to negotiate and or might facilitate negotiation of these barriers, including what did they view as perceived benefits? What level of self-efficacy did they have to engage with nature? Again, this kind of fits into maybe their level of nature experience. And also issues related to cues to action. What news, what interactions with other people would essentially trigger people to go outside and do things? And how did that influence time and nature? And then there was also the perceived threat of COVID, both the sense of susceptibility to getting sick and the perception of just how serious the disease was. And this is where the corona data comes in, because in addition to the questions that we asked in the cans itself, corona data has things back from the earliest days of the pandemic about whether people thought it was a serious disease, whether they thought it was a hoax, and we can mine that data to help understand what's going on with time outside. So we took all of those, we took that conceptual model, and we had lots of conversations, and we went back and forth between lots of different questions and whittled them down and put more back in and took them out and revised it down to the number of questions we have. Then we sent it out for expert review. And this is where several of you on the call were involved, as we had you look at the survey and tell us what you thought was missing or what its strengths were. Then we took your advice and we revised the survey. And then we sent it back out to essentially lay readers and did a cognitive review where we asked them to read through the questions and just talk out loud, read the questions. And we told them we weren't interested in what their specific answer was. What we were interested in was, what did the question make them think about? What did the potential responses to the question that were provided make think about? Did they think that we had the appropriate responses? And kind of went through all of that to make sure when a lay person read the survey, they were answering the questions that we had intended to ask. And then we revised it again. Then we sent it back out in a pilot test through Amazon's Mechanical Turk to get a sense of how long did it take people to take the survey. Did they seem to give us responses? Some of them were, of course, were not, because this is a paid survey process and a lot of people take it seriously. Some didn't. And so, but we did get a sense of it. This made sure that the coding and things in the back end were appropriate. We revised again, and then we launched the survey in May of 2022. And so the questions were phrased in such a way that we asked about perceptions and behavior in May of 2022, specifically because May of 22 was after vaccines had become commonly available and many people had already been vaccinated, and the world was opening back up. Several of our other questions were asked with a reference to May of 2021 in order to get people's opinions about a time before the vaccines were widely available. And so we felt that would give us a contrast between times when people felt COVID might be more severe and more of a threat and less of a threat. Okay, so the eligibility, we're going to talk about the survey distribution for a few minutes. It was eligible to people over the age of 18. We specifically targeted large urban areas by looking at zip codes in the 100 largest metropolitan statistical areas. And we asked that people live in the same zip code in 2021 and 2022 so that any difference that we saw in their responses between 2021 and 2022 would be presumably because of actual changes in behaviors and attitudes that were not dependent on having moved to a completely new location. The other thing that's not on here is we also selectively sent the survey to the zip codes that were in the highest and lowest tertiles of poverty. So groups of people who were either in the lowest poverty level zip codes, which means the highest wealth, or the highest poverty or lowest wealth zip codes. The survey was distributed by a commercial company called Forthright. And the reason we went with Forthright is this was the company that Beth Redbird had used to, or has used to distribute the Corona Data US. By using Corona Data and linking through Forthright, we were able to link the data from CANS to Corona Data US by a unique identifier that identifies panelists who are recruited by Forthright through what is as close as can be done these days to a random representative sample of the US. The way Forthright works is they send out postcards to every mailing address in the US and ask people if they'd be interested in participating in surveys for and receiving a small monetary reward. And so we were able to be able to link our data with the multiple waves of data from Beth's survey, which began in April 2022, with the hope of getting a somewhat representative sample of the US population. We didn't have enough money to survey absolutely everybody in Beth's survey, which is one of the reasons we focused on urban areas. And this is how we kind of divided things up, is we started with the census regions of the United States, and we picked metropolitan statistical areas that were within the 100 largest MSAs in each area. One of the things we found early on is that the South Atlantic region has a huge number of large metropolitan statistical areas. So in developing our sampling plan, we kept the South Atlantic area from the west and east, south, central areas. And with the west, we realized that there is a very big difference in the landscape and cultures between the Intermountain West and the Pacific Coast. And so for the western region, and also this is such a huge area, we separated the Intermountain West from the Pacific region. But the Midwest and the Northeast, we kept as their consolidated census regions. So this is sort of what things look like. We ranked the metropolitan statistical areas in each census area by size, and for each census area, we worked from the largest to the smallest within that 100 area, or the 100 metropolitan statistical areas. We then pulled the zip codes for each of those areas and did an economic split, looking at the highest and lowest poverty tertiles. And again, as I said, we released it in early May, and within a little over 2 weeks, we had received 1,900 open links, which was what we had aimed for. And so we closed the survey on the 20th of May. So we have about a 2-week period when we were sampling. This is what we obtained in terms of our distribution for geographic distribution and poverty and wealth. In each of the areas, we did reasonably well, although it's interesting in terms of polling, low poverty versus high poverty. The Northeast, we got fairly equal numbers. We were hoping for 175 people from each what we think of as a sampling cell. So 175 from the north, from high and low tertiles from each census region. We got a little bit more low poverty in the Northeast. What's interesting is in the South Atlantic and the, well, throughout the Southern census region, we ended up with higher levels of larger numbers of people in the high poverty tertiles, and slightly also in the Western, the Pacific West. But anyway, I think, you know, we did fairly well, and we essentially saturated COVID or Forthright's database with our sampling plan. And when I asked them, you know, could they potentially get more people if we extended the survey, and they said, no, you've got everybody that's in our database that, you know, had responded to Beth's survey and who lives in the appropriate areas. So this is what a little bit of the taste of the data looks like, is we were able to get a racially and ethnically diverse sample set. We used the categories available on the 2020 US Census, and we let people self-describe and check all that applied. And this is essentially what we came up with. I can go, you know, we have more granular levels, especially on the what the 2 or more races were selected, but essentially we have a slightly less, slightly fewer people identifying as white only, slightly more people identifying as Black or African American than in the US Census itself. Fairly good representation that compares reasonably well with the US Census for Hispanic. What was interesting is when we gave people the option to select Hispanic alone versus or to select it in combination with other thing, about 8.8% of our population selected Hispanic alone with no other characteristics. And we had about 10% of the population identify themselves as being 2 or more races or ethnicities. So looking at how things improved or changed between 2021 and 2022, not a lot that was surprising. Fewer people were worried about getting sick in 2022. More people, but not a lot more, reported spending 3 or more days a week engaging with nature. More people in 2022, and I find this a little bit surprising because even by 2021, at least my impression and the impressions from a lot of, you know, from other studies that I've been seeing, and I'd love to know what people find in their own work, was that parks and trails were opening back up again, but still in 2021, the people we surveyed, 36% of them still said that only 36%, let me get this straight. Only 36% said that the parks and trails near them were open, whereas in 2022, 77% said they were open. What's interesting is I think many of us were hoping and expecting that with all of this reported increase of people being out on trails, we would see potentially an increase in people's sense that nature was important to them. We didn't see a change. There's virtually, well, it's 48% in each year. And again, I'd like to discuss this. I think this is somewhat consistent with some of the newer data that are coming out from the Parks and Trail and Land Management group that are starting to report that, well, a lot of that increase in trail was from people who were already using trails and not a lot of new users. But still, I think we've got some room to work. And I think it's interesting that with this essentially randomized general population study, less than 50% of the people in the US are viewing nature as being something that's important to them in these two periods. Again, not a lot that's surprising in terms of what people say, in terms of what engaging in nature does for them, although it is interesting given that only 48% of the population was saying that they think nature is important to them, that we were getting such high numbers of people feeling that nature, that strongly agreed or somewhat agreed with these statements about benefits of nature, from making them feel calmer, improving their health, managing stress and anxiety, improving mood, improving ability to concentrate and focus, provide a safe space in which to socialize, provide a break from my work responsibilities, and provide a break from my caregiving responsibilities. And we could talk about this later in the discussion because one of my students has been looking at the caregiving. But what I want to focus on today is this statement about nature improving my mood, because this is one of the things that we as researchers and practitioners talk about a lot, about the importance of nature, is that engaging with nature, even for short periods of time, and even when it's, even if you're not going outside, but even listening to music, listening to sounds of birds, or looking out your window helps improve your mood. One of my students, Jad Darwich, has dug a little bit into this data, and here's that same statement again. It says 87% of people said that nature improved their mood. But when we asked them a question about essentially related to their self-efficacy to engage with nature, and we asked them, I am confident that I could spend time in nature when I'm in a bad mood. Only about 50 of the people felt that they were confident that they could spend time in nature when they were in a bad mood. So this is interesting. We don't quite know what it means in terms of whether they feel that they don't have access to it. We're going to dig into that and see what's going on. But there's an interesting disconnect in here that deserves to be explored. The other thing Jad did is he looked at how does people's sense of self-efficacy influence how much time they actually spend in nature. So he cross-tabbed the data and said, looking at people's responses to the question of, I am confident that I could spend time in nature when I am in a bad mood, with the amount of time they actually spent. And people who say that they were not at all confident, not a surprise. They're not spending much time, at least not many days in nature. But if people are very confident, they are spending time outside. So we need to kind of dig in and think about this confidence and the relationship to spending time in nature. So that's a highlight. I just want to go over some of the lessons that we learned from putting this survey together, is that multiple dibs of the team members really enriched the team. There were lots of thoughtful conversations and different approaches to formulating the questions, and I think we really came up with something unique and important. Formulating and refining the questions took time. However, the expert review and the read out loud processes and the number of revisions, I think, were absolutely essential to come up with a survey that addressed the concerns that we were after. The advantage of using the panel from Dr. Redbird's Corona Data US survey is that we surveyed a cohort of people who are not committed to parks, recreation, and green space. So we weren't recruiting through Facebook of green space users or whatever. So we feel this may be a bit more nationally representative. We did distribute it nationwide to get geographic variability. This lets us both slice the data to look at geographic differences, but also lets us combine groups by various identity groups to hopefully have something that's a little bit more generalizable about the national perspective. And it provides access to data from early in the pandemic. Now, so the timing in terms of when we released this survey in 2022 is we were getting views of behaviors and perceptions as we started to emerge from the pandemic. So we're getting a sense of, as we emerge into the new normal, how are people thinking about the way they spend time in nature, and how much time are they actually spending? So with that, I want to acknowledge the help from a lot of different people, including the team, and also to all of you who helped us as expert reviewers. But I want to specifically call out Abby Kasicki, my current research coordinator, and Arseny Menesov, who was my research coordinator until about 1.5 years ago. Colleen Murphy, who was a Master's of Public Health intern, who helped very early on in establishing the conceptual diagram, and then undergraduate research assistants Annalise Biesterfeld, Jad Darwich, and Olivia Poole, who have all helped clean and analyze the data. And of course, our funding sources, we had a small seed grant from the Weinberg College of Arts and Sciences at Northwestern University, and additional funding from the Nagani Foundation. So with that, I'll ask for questions, and if anybody wants to do the deep dive into what's into each of the types of questions, I've got those that information hidden at the end of the slide presentation. But for that, I will stop sharing. I'll take a quick peek. Okay, so I am open to questions. Jeanette. Oh, that's a clap, not a hand.
That's a clap. Very nice presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good to hear about it all. I don't have a question right now.
Yeah, thank you, Terry, for the great presentation. It seems like it was a lot of teamwork that went into this. But like Terry said, we're going to open it up for questions. We have about 10 minutes here. If anyone has any questions for Terry.
Terry, I'll ask a question.
Sure. Hi, Laura.
Hi. So just hearing, of course, it's of concern, this confidence issue, people that they don't feel confident about being to, I'm not sure the exact verbiage again. And I'm just wondering, do, the parks organizations, whether they're public or the foundations that support the parks, that they would be very interested in that information and the digging deeper. And I was wondering if that, with your group and beyond, if you thought about how you share that information to people and then figure out how to next steps from there.
Very good question. So one of the first things is Jad has been working really hard and doing some more advanced modeling to look at that data and see what's influencing it. So, we'll do the multi-step role of that information. Starting at the conference next month, Jad is giving a presentation. If you're coming to SHIP, go be kind to an undergraduate giving his first presentation at a national conference. But he's very excited to be there and present that. And so I'm hoping we'll get some feedback from the land management and parks and rec folk. We will be publishing this in both research focused journals and sharing it out through more parks and rec and land management appropriate. And I'm happy to talk with anybody about the data and get ideas of how it could be used. That's also part of what this is all about, is Let us know what would be of interest to you and how you want to hear about it, especially if you're not another researcher, because yeah, I'll hear from the researchers. Yeah, okay. So the question is, we're going to try to get it out every which way we can, because particularly Catherine, since Catherine Gain is not a researcher, she is a land management person. This came out really with, let's think about how we can move this into policy and how we can affect programming. So yeah, it's a matter of what we're hoping with this survey is to find things that were not obvious, to say, oh, hey, we need to think about this. We need to think about what is the programming that's needed to make people feel confident? What's the education? And we've got some things in the survey, including an open-ended question about what would you need to engage more with nature. And so digging into those text and open text responses is going to be a big job. And one of the other things that comes up often is, what is nature? And so we dug into that. We even started the survey with an open text box saying, tell us what you think nature is, so that we kind of primed people's brain to start thinking about it. And then we gave them a definition of how we were going to be using that concept when we asked the questions. And then that was followed with about an 18-part checklist of what of these items do you think represent nature? And that even included houseplants. And one of the interesting things we're getting with looking at the time is in nature is that there are people who include their house plants and say that they're spending 24 hours a day in nature because they're surrounded by house plants. And so that's been an interesting game, thing to play with and sorting out in the data and how that fits into things. So Sandy, you have your hand up.
Yeah, hey Terry, thanks for the wonderful presentation. So you just said you have a lot of text and open-ended questions. Is your group of researchers planning to analyze that, or is that something, I'm just thinking of possible projects for this group to work on in the next year? Is that something that you might be thinking about recruiting new people to work on?
I need to talk with the whole team, because everybody has their pet project in the team. But I think if there's anything that isn't obviously already spoken for by the team members, we would be more than happy to work together as a team with other team members. I know Bill is a biochemist. You can chime in here, and chemical engineer, but he is delving in for the first time in collaboration with Courtney Schultz to do some text analysis. And so that's one of the things that Bill and Courtney are digging into, is that very first question of what do people think nature is. So Bill, do you want to say anything more about that? Guess not. Okay. So yes, a qualified yes for additional collaborations. But like I said, we're going to take a very team approach here, and yeah.
Great, thanks.
Yeah.
Sandy, I think that brings up a really good question that goes beyond this study, that data is so expensive to collect and it's so time sensitive. And I think when you get really, really protective, I mean, within reason, I think there's ethical considerations, because you could, if you are more collaborative and you're open to sharing, then you can kind of get that knowledge out.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, and we do have a data sharing process, so that was in the original plan. But given the number of people who are part of the team who are already part of this group, I think there will be ample opportunities for collaboration. Gina.
Terry, could you comment? I know that I have completed one of those data sharing and talked with the group about an analysis. Could you maybe share with the group how many other like sort of analyses are going on besides mine and Bill's? Because I do think that multiple sort of requests within our group. Originally, we had such a big group, and that there was, we created a process, and there was sort of an approval of like what variables do you want to use? What's your research question? Maybe you could talk a little bit about that with this group.
Yeah, well, right now, we're focusing on issues related to mental health, what people are defining as green space. Interesting things that we've done, and this is in part with Dr. Amber Pearson at Michigan State University, because Amber is a health geographer. And she is very much interested in using new and novel methods to assess green space. And so she's using the data to, well, we asked a question at the end. We didn't want to ask people for their specific address for obvious reasons. But what we did ask them was the intersection nearest their home. And we geolocated all of those intersections. And so she is looking at how many parks and how much green space, and uses several different green space measures. And then we will have that available to look at how much time people are spending in nature. And so looking at different objective and then also people's subjective measures of how much time they're spending in nature, and kind of getting the geographic sense of both if people perceive that they have lots of access but are not near it. And so we can kind of break down those questions. So there's the objective, so there's the GIS location. There's mental health. What I'm very interested in is the original intent of this was looking at the impact of race, ethnicity, and socioeconomic status on time in nature. So I'm going to be digging into that. But we also have issues related to gender, and there are a couple of things. Like I had 2 undergraduates who started things, one looking at caregiving activity, and we had some interesting results. So anybody who's interested in looking at the impact of caregiving activity. But I would say there's still a lot that needs to be done. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, awesome. Does anyone have any final questions here for Terry before we continue on with our closing information? All right, I'm seeing a lot of shaking of the head, so we're going to continue on. Yeah, again, thank you, Terry, for presenting that for us. And we look forward to all of the cool different studies that come out from that. So, as we talked about during our agenda, we're going to just quickly discuss if anyone has any current projects that they're working on, or are in a new stage that they would also like to bring in new members for. Feel free to just share if you are in that camp, and if not, that's okay. All right, so I'm thinking next meeting we might have some time to talk about potential projects and stuff like that as well, to kind of kick off this upcoming year, this new year, as we move in there with projects and stuff. So we will have time to talk about that coming up. Next is going to be our open mic. I know that Russ had put something in here, so I just wanted to quickly do his open mic. So he unfortunately had to leave a little early But he wanted to remind everyone to save the date. March 25th through the 28th is the 2024 ALC, the Active Living Conference, is in Chattanooga, Tennessee this upcoming year. And he does have a link there that I will repost as well into the group chat, so we don't have to scroll up too far. Does anyone else have any open mic comments they would like to make?
Terry asked that we just share with people who may not be familiar with that group how they can join and participate in the future.
Absolutely, yeah. So if you're interested in joining and participating in the future, feel free to send me an email after this meeting. It's ajohns48@tulane.edu. I'll go ahead and put that in the chat here in a second as well. Or you can go onto the PAPREN website, go into groups at the top, find the Parks and Green Space Work Group, which will be a drop-down menu there. And you can go ahead and put your information in there, and then that will ding me to add you to the group, and we'll get you added there as well. We do have monthly meetings here. We do take a summer break, but most months we have a meeting, and it's going to be that last Monday of every month there. So if you are interested in joining, you can either email me directly or go through that PAPREN website to get there. Any other open mic notes?
It looks like Gina asked if they've opened up the ALC call for abstracts yet. I don't think so, Gina. Doesn't look like it.
I just followed the link. It says later this fall.
And then Jeanette is asking also if we should, if this time is not really convenient for people, if we should be kind of seeing if we should move our meeting time into a different day and maybe a different time of day. Does anyone have any feedback on that?
Well, I know there are a lot more people who say they are part of the group, but don't attend the meetings. So I don't know if that's because they don't want to attend the meetings or whatever, or the time is inconvenient. So
maybe, I mean, we might want to do a poll of the broader group and see what times work for them. Because yeah, we definitely, I mean, the people who are on this call are always on, like, who are on, almost always make our meetings, but there are definitely a lot more on the list that are not making the meetings. And that is some of the feedback that we got from the annual survey that Karen sent out to everyone.
Yeah, we can absolutely try and do a poll and see if another time works here as well. I do know, how is the look for a new fellow going, co-chairs? Should we?
well, we're just going to talk about that after this meeting. So
Oh, okay. Well, if anyone knows a fellow that may be interested, or a young student who may be interested in fellowing the group, I don't know if there's anyone who's interested, but they may have an opening coming up soon, as September is my last meeting here as well. Cool. Final things I just want to point out here before we go.
Rich just put something in the
Oh, did he?
yeah, for nature and health.
Yeah, just in case folks hadn't seen this, it's a call for special issue papers on nature and health from the Ecopsychology Journal. Jay Maddock and Nushin Razzini are the guest editors for it, and the deadline for submission is December 22nd. So just, I'm sure a lot of you have already heard about this, but yeah.
Yeah, absolutely good information to have. All right, and then finally here, just sharing our next steps here as a group. Our next meeting is going to be September 25th, 2023 at 11 a.m. Our speaker is still to be determined here. Something to look out for, we do have an October speaker already, where we have LA County's Parks After Dark program / UCLA. The primary investigator of that program, Dr. Nabira Parat, will be speaking in October for us, which is super exciting. But we are still looking for someone for September. So if you know anyone, let me know. Otherwise, we're still looking there. And then we do have a September grand rounds coming up. That's going to be September 27th at noon Eastern. Advanced registration is required for that. You can find that on the PAPREN website, or they will be in the emails for the Parks and Green Space Work Group as they go out too. We'll be talking about how our subgroups are putting information into the world. So and what we're working on as subgroups as well. There. And so that's all I've got for you. I hope everyone has a great rest of their day. Thank you for attending, and we will see you next month.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Terry.